You have found the Redhead Family Therapy Guy and a Mic podcast, looking at mental health through a pop culture lens.
All right, here we are again. We're doing this podcast thing. We're doing another interview one. Welcome to the Redhead Family Therapy Guy
And a Mic.
I'm John.
And I'm Michael.
And we've got an awesome guest with us. I'm super excited about this guest. He's got the coolest background. He's a freaking stud. And we're excited to have him on.
Yeah.
Bill, so good to have you with us, man. Great.
Thanks so much, Bill, for coming on. We're excited. So maybe tell us where are you from and what do you do?
So I am born and raised in northern New Jersey. Mm-hmm. I ran away at 19, never looked back. But I grew up in a small town. Kind of if you think of New Jersey as a figure eight and you throw a dart right in the middle of the top of the eight, that's where our hometown was. That's where my hometown was.
Lake of Packon.
My
Shepperson, right? So
my family lived there from about the 1890s. Is when my family got to. It's my town's kind of crazy. It's like it's on the border of rural and suburban, mostly rural, because it's like you start to get into these beautiful rolling foothills on your way to the Appalachians if you keep going west. Mm-hmm. It's an old resort town, so there was a lake in the town, and the part where my family lived was this little part called Berkshire Valley, which is not on either of what was considered sides of town. Mm-hmm. It was just like this weird little spur down at the bottom. But my family was there from about the 1890s on.
So then were you born there, Bill? Is that where you're born and you grew up till 19?
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, till I was 19.
It's so picturesque up there. Like people, when you think of New Jersey, you would never think of this part of the world. It's not what anybody thinks of. It really is like, you have to think West Virginia kind of is what it's like. It's so gorgeous up there. My wife, full disclosure, Bill is a high school friend of my wife. And so it is so gorgeous up there, man. It's some of the
right. And you tell people in one breath, it's like, no, I grew up in New Jersey and I grew up playing in the woods. Like, for real.
Like, huh? Yeah. Everybody thinks beach or like the deplorable towns that are New Jersey has the worst cities. It's just awful.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, I didn't want to live there. But I loved where I grew up.
So then why did you leave and never look back?
There's a lot of different reasons going on there.
Loaded question.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like I still have a lot of friends that are in my hometown. I have friends that are, went back there after service or after college, and they're now on the police force or they're on the fire department. Like my one buddy, Matt, and brother Robert were two of my oldest friends because our dads and uncles were all friends and went to high school together. And like, if you've seen from some of my like social media, some of my Facebook posts and stuff, how I'm heavily involved in scouting. Mm-hmm. Well, my buddy's little brother, Matt, runs the scout troop, the same troop that we were all in together, meeting at the same firehouse where my dad was chief. Like it's just that kind of iconic anachronism nowadays.
Is all your family still back there, Bill? Like you have, like, I don't know your siblings and stuff. Like how many siblings do you have?
So my sister moved to the mythical kingdom of Central Jersey, which doesn't really exist. We refer to that as Narnia. So she moved down that way about 3 or 4 years ago. My mom's still up in or close to our hometown, just outside the border there. My uncles, 2 of my uncles still on the same property, my grandparents' property that I grew up on, which is in that Berkshire Valley area that I talked about.
Is that the original 1890 property then?
Yep. Yeah.
Cool.
So
that's cool.
There's the investment value on that one.
Yep. So it's crazy. My family, the way the story goes is round about the Civil War time frame. My family on my dad's side was all tobacco farmers in Kentucky. And the way it goes is Civil War rolled around. Half the family agreed with the South, half the family agreed with the North. I come from the side that agreed with the North. So they split the crop down the middle and moved to Hoboken, New Jersey, which is right on the other side of the river.
Legit.
And with what they brought and with the sales, they built a cigar factory, and they settled in this little valley that's about 25 miles inland called Berkshire Valley. And like when they first got there, they bought the valley.
Wow. Wouldn't that be awesome? Just move somewhere and be like, I'm buying this valley.
I'm buying everything from that mountain to that mountain.
Sold
what I'm talking about.
$10. That's crazy, dude. Like, that's like the most American story. Well, I'm glad you ended up with the winners.
Isn't Hoboken the place where the cake guy is at? What's it called?
Cake guy?
Cake Boss.
Yeah. Cake Boss. Yeah.
Oh, Cake Boss.
We went in there and dropped like $100 on pastries.
Was it worth it?
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was for me. Heck yeah. I'll take $20 worth of cannolis and all these things. Yeah.
It's fun. There's a pie place in Utah that we do the same thing on our scout trip every year.
Do you? Is that worth $100?
Apparently. But yes, really good pie. It's like everything's homemade every day. And they make their bank just off the tourists.
So then families from, or at least your half is from, if I understood, the northern part of the 8 in New Jersey. If we were to look at it at a figure, as a figure.
You think of New Jersey, throw a dart right in the middle of the top half. Dead center of that top circle.
You leave when you're 19, and it sounds like there's a myriad of different reasons, and you just don't look back because you don't want to, or you just get really busy with all types of stuff and you just don't ever really get a chance to look back.
I just got really busy. This is, one of the things that I tell like the older Eagle Scouts that I talk to now is I've been on this adventure since I was 8 years old. The same one I'm on right now. And like the first scouting events, the first time camping out in the woods, that whole business. The background of my family too. My grandfather was an Army tanker in World War II. My dad served in Army Intel during Vietnam. My uncle was in the Marine Corps during Vietnam. I mean, just a lot of service members going back.
Yeah.
Well, is your wife from there, or where did you meet your wife? And tell us how many kids you have.
So I met my wife at my first duty station within my first year in the Marine Corps. We were, as young Marines do, we were at this club in what's called the Inland Empire, San Bernardino area. And we just met a bunch of people there, and we left the club we were at, and then we started regularly having this bonfire on the grounds of UC San Bernardino. And my wife and I just started talking, and really it was just, we enjoyed each other's company. She was actually dating my squad medic when we first met. And that relationship fizzled out. But we always stayed in contact, and we loved each other's company. We loved talking to each other for 4 years. We became best friends. We became each other's confidant. Yep. And so we stayed in constant contact. Like when I was on deployment, and technology not being what it is now, when you're on deployment on a ship, you'd be on the ship's phone and it'd be a 30-second delay. So you'd be talking down in the bowels of ship, and you'd have to like meter out your words and then wait for a response. And she was one of the people I'd call. We were best friends for 3.5 years, and like almost immediately.
That's awesome.
And then in June of 2003, without ever having dated, she called me on June 18th and said, let's go to Vegas to get married on Saturday. And that's what we did.
She proposed to you.
Oh yeah.
That's cool.
Hey, she's like, I'm nailing this Marine down. We're doing
Where'd you get married in Vegas?
The Little White Wedding Chapel.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's a popular one.
That's a popular one. For outer towners.
That's cool.
Awesome. How many kids do you have, Bill?
I have 4.
Nice.
I
And
have
what age ranges
2 daughters who are. Oh, go ahead.
What age ranges are your
So
kids?
2 daughters. My 2 daughters, one's 20, one's 13, and then 2 sons, one's 14 and one's 12.
Awesome. And are they all home still, or is the older one out?
No, they're all home.
Awesome.
The older one just started at UNLV. She went to CSN for 2 years, and now she's at UNLV. And then my older boy is a high school freshman, and then I have an 8th grader and a 7th grader.
Awesome.
Nice,
good for her. UNLV is a good school, right, John? The best.
I don't know. I don't think so.
Oh, it is.
They're like
It
rebels
is.
over there. I don't know, dude.
Tell her she picked it.
So tell us about what rank did you acquire in the military service, and what was the nature of your service? I know that's a big part of who you are, and even kind of relative to what you do, since you've retired, I assume. So what was your career in the military?
So I'll back it up a little bit to the journey of getting into the military, because that was its own thing.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I had always wanted to join the service. That was a recurring theme in my mind. And then in high school, I really kind of lost my way. I had great friends, but I didn't apply myself in school at all. I ended up graduating bottom 10% of my class, which I hate to look back on that. So I left high school, and then I kept telling my father, further back, my mom and dad split up when I was 6. They were both in my lives all throughout, the past 40 years. But I got out of high school, and I was roughly 380 pounds. And I kept telling my father, I'm going to join the service. Yeah, I'm joining the service. And I'm just going down this road of staying out too late, partying, not applying myself, not moving any further towards that goal. And then the driving force was when I was coming in after partying with a bunch of other folks that were on a dark path. And I came through the door. Now, my dad would leave for work at 4 a.m. I came through the door, and he was getting ready for work because I was coming in at 3:30 or 4 a.m. And he looked at me and he said, whenever you wake up, you're going to go down to County College of Morris, which was local community college, and sign up for classes, because you got to do something, because you're obviously not going in the service.
Dagger.
Yeah. So
Dad threw down. He's like,
yep.
Oh yeah, Mr. I'm going in the service. I don't think so.
He called you out.
He did. He did. And it put such an anger in me, because it was at me, it was at anything. It was the best man I've ever known just called me out and has shown that he's lost faith. So I lost 120 pounds in about 9 months.
Wow.
After that.
Oh, dude. That sounds like straight Goggins right there, dude. That's like Goggins.
Which is funny, because I've just found his stuff and I love his stuff.
Dude, Goggins is no joke, dude. You want to feel like you need to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do something with your life? Just listen to that guy for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
No freaking joke. I love it.
So tell us about that story. I know this is probably it's a story within a story, but being able to lose that much weight in that time period, and probably making a lot of life changes. What was that process like? What did it take? What were some of the, I guess, hard parts along the way?
Partying and chicken and rice, dude. So it sounds like.
So immediately, the path that I was on, first things cut out: no alcohol, no drugs.
Mm-hmm.
That was gone. No smoking. That was all gone. Everything became
what helped? What helped you to stop? Because oftentimes with things like that, you can just stop, but then staying stopped is the hardest part, especially through those first few weeks or few months. So what helped you? Was it just the fire that your dad, the teenage angst of I'm going to show you? What was it that got you through that?
It's the rebellion. It's the punk rock kid of I am never going to let anybody talk to me like that again.
It's just grit and like manness. I'm doing this.
I mean, luckily in high school, even though I was really heavy, I wrestled and I played lacrosse. So
you had an athletic background,
and I had lungs.
Yeah.
So whenever I would find myself needing something to, and I would run and work out and run and work out and run and work out, and eventually it just started peeling off.
Yeah, it's the amazing thing about consistency, right? If you can be consistent with exercise, the beautiful thing it does is cause you to drop weight and feel better. It's just hard to be consistent.
Did you like go down to the recruiter's office and get going at the beginning of that 9-month journey and kind of get some accountability, or did you have a weight in mind that you had to get to? Or
so my first choice for us service to go in was actually the Coast Guard.
Oh, right on.
And the Coast Guard recruiter gave me a list of reasons why I wouldn't be able to do it and why I shouldn't waste my time. And then I met an Air Force recruiter who gave me the real deal of, you got to lose 120 pounds. And he was really motivated. And he was like, you show me what you can do and we'll do it. And that was about 4 or 5 months before my dad and I had that exchange. Okay. So I was kind of like half-hearted and didn't like, I like talking to the guy. I like being down there, and I just never put in for it. That Air Force recruiter was awesome, but he rotated out, and then a far less impressive Air Force recruiter showed up. So I kept stopping down the office, and I started running and I adjusted my diet. I'd started cutting things out, but then this Air Force recruiter was never in the office. Well, one door jam away was the Marine recruiters, and then the sergeant who was there at the time yells over to me, "Hey, young lad, he's never here. Why don't you talk to me?" Just the recruiter. And I told him, and he's like, "Well, you know what? If you got that kind of commitment, I bet if you lose 20 pounds, I could talk to my boss." Mm-hmm. And then I lost 20. I showed up back to the office. He was, "Oh, I talked to my boss. He said he'd lose about 15. And it was just stair steps down until I had.
Isn't it amazing how much it can do for our motivation and our ability to keep moving forward when we can break things down into manageable chunks? It really makes the difference.
Yep. And that's all you're thinking. Like 120 pounds is a huge number.
Yes.
But you tell me 15. All right. I'm just going to go wear myself out for a week and I'll be fine.
It's interesting to hear that you first checked into the Coast Guard or Air Force, or then we're talking to Air Force guy, because it's hard for me to imagine you, from what I know about you, in any other place than the Marines. So it sounds like it was fortuitous.
I found my way to the right place. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
So then what age were you, Bill, when you ended up and so you enlisted in the Marines then, is that right? Or did you go in?
I did.
Okay. Yep. So then what age were you when you enlisted?
19.
Okay. So then that's what kind of propelled the exodus from New Jersey.
Oh yeah. I was 19. It was 1998. It was between Christmas and New Year's, 1998. And when I arrived on Parris Island to start that part of the journey.
Wow. So 1998. So you're just a few 2 to 3 years prior to September 11th. So then yep. I'm guessing you maintained your service through that period. What did you end up doing throughout I guess the early 2000s, mid 2010s? Were you still in the service then? Were you in Iraq? What was going on there?
So I ended up getting out in early 2007. Okay. And started working at the Department of Energy site that I work at now. Okay. When I joined, it was at the end of the Clinton years. The Marine Corps, as many other services, had just gone through a giant reduction in force. It was weird the years before I got there, because like my senior Marines would tell me that nobody had gotten promoted for like 8 to 10 years. Because they were doing this reduction, and it's just, different policies and different politics send things different directions. So I joined a Marine Corps that was, some people would call it peacetime, but you're going to learn in the journey that there is never a peacetime Marine Corps.
Yeah.
That's not what it was founded for. That's not what it does. So I get there. At the time, the only job, if you went open contract, which means they could assign you any job in the service, the only job you could not get as an open contract was infantry, was the fighter. So I had to ask for that. So I asked for that 6 months before I shipped. And you're guaranteed that career field. So you could have any job within the infantry. You could be a rifleman, you could be a machine gunner, you could be a mortarman, you could be an anti-tank guided missileman. It's just a question of what the Marine Corps needed after you graduated from boot camp.
Okay.
And they usually base that off your test scores too. So like there's a certain cutting for like anti-tank guided missileman, you have to have scored a certain level on the certain parts of the ASVAB test. So one of my fun memories, early memories of the Marine Corps, was I graduated boot camp, get to infantry school, and you go through the rifleman package. So everybody learns how to be a rifleman and learns how to be your basic 0311 infantry rifleman. And then for those of us that were going over to the weapons specialties for the specialized stuff, the sergeant that was in charge of the machine gun package comes out and says, "Knipper, it says here on my sheet, you're smart enough to be a tow gunner." That's the anti-tank guided missileman. "But I like your size, so I know what I'm going to make you." And that started my journey as an infantry machine gunner, which is the best job on the planet, without a doubt.
So then being a larger guy, does that help being a machine gunner? I have no idea. Tell us why that comment was there.
So the different machine guns that we use are 2 to 4 times as heavy as the equipment that your general rifleman has to carry. So like the heavy machine guns that I used, like the M250 caliber machine gun, which is one of the oldest weapons still in continuous use, that weapon by itself is 60 pounds.
Wow.
That's before you had, and that's before you carry it as a team. So like if I'm carrying the gun, which is 60 pounds, another person's carrying the heavy tripod, which is 44 pounds. And then other people are still laying down with ammunition.
Yeah. I bet those bullets are really light though.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like that big.
So between your little group, you're carrying around a John.
Yes.
I don't know. It's more than me. It's more than me. I weigh like $148 or something like that.
Yep. That's why the comment then, because they're a lot bigger and heavier of guns, and so having someone who's stronger and bigger just makes it more feasible.
Yeah. So I am 2 inches. I was 3 inches too tall to join the service. Any service, because the cap for most services is 6'6", and I'm 6'9". So like even after I lost all that weight, I had to write a letter for a height waiver to be allowed in.
We take no responsibility for how often you will bump.
Why do they have the height waiver? Do you know?
You got to fit in a plane, or you got.
Well, I could understand like in the Navy if you're in a submarine, or I could understand being like a fighter pilot or something like that. But why just in general?
I think it's for uniformity, and it's for fitting in equipment, and it's for fitting equipment to you.
Oh, okay.
So like, and also fitting through simple things. Like you should see me having to move through a ship that's has all the hatches battened down because we're moving in dangerous waters, right? And I'm having to carry the gun, but I'm having to like the fun end of that story is when I went to survival school. Because they partner you up as nav buddies, and it is cold in the mountains of Southern California when you're going through survival school. Well, they partnered me up with this dude who was a Navy pilot, who was like $140, and so you're spooning together for warmth, right? Because you're freezing. Well, he was totally warm. I was freezing.
That's too much body mass.
He was loving it.
Oh yeah, he was fine. He had like a bearskin rug around him.
So then, so then what types of things does a machine gunner do? I mean, I can venture guesses, and I probably wouldn't, I guess, be too far off on some of them, but I really have no idea. So what does a machine gunner do?
So a machine gunner, like they're usually split up in two different types. It is just based on where you're assigned. Mm-hmm. You have the medium machine gunners, which carry the M2, well, in our case, the M240 medium machine gun that, and you are directly down with the rifle companies and you travel in what's called a support element. So like if we were going into a deliberate attack, the machine gun softens up the target before the riflemen get to it, and also keep the bad guys' heads down until the riflemen close to that final closing distance.
So you're just laying cover fire, or are you just laying cover fire all the time? Or?
Yeah, same idea. Yeah. Same idea. So, and that, so that involves, if you're doing that, you bring your own security with you, which is normally the guys carrying the ammunition as well. And you go to a support by fire position to where you are going to execute this deliberate attack. And then you just go hammer down on the target until the riflemen get close enough to conduct the final engagements. So
it's a blessing that you still have your hearing. Is that what we're hearing?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's all about geometry and knowing where to stand in relation to the gun.
It reminds me a lot of playing video games with John. We play a lot of shooters together, except for I'm sure much less scary than what you experienced, Bill. Probably not a good comparison, but it reminds me of that.
I always pick the cover fire guy. It's hilarious. I always carry the heavy machine gun. I'm just like laying down. I'm like, Michael, come around the side. And I just like lay down. And I always get the extra big clips so I can like shoot 200 bullets at a time or whatever.
He levels up quick.
Yeah. But that's the thing. It's when getting to do that job for real.
Yeah.
You are the shepherd.
That's awesome.
Man.
That's cool.
The better you do your job, the more people come home.
That's awesome.
So I've got a question about service then. We're going to jump right into it. I want to hear, because I know you did a lot of time in service. I know you spent a lot of time overseas and we're in war and all that. So what's one of the most harrowing or courageous stories, or one of the greatest times you saw the greatest bravery? I got a couple. So let's start with that one. What's one of the times where you just saw just some incredible bravery from your Marine brothers overseas?
So when it comes to those cases, the way my deployments line up, the last one in 2004 was the absolute grittiest. That was the first and second battles of Fallujah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when you see what was done there and those classic, for lack of a better term, the archetypes of valor. The first Marine Medal of Honor recipient in Anbar Province while we were there was Jason Dunham, a machine gunner with 2.7, for falling on a grenade that fell within the midst of his guys. The real and one of my former leaders, who was actually the senior enlist of my old company, is a retired Marine Sergeant Major by the name of Brad Castle, and that. His story is legendary to us now. It was my old unit. They stayed there after I had rotated out because I was actually on task training Iraqi commandos earlier that year outside of the city of Ramadi to do jobs there. But when my unit rotated back into the fight for the final takedown of Fallujah, Brad Castle ended up, he entered this house, which in Marine Corps lore is known as the house from hell. It was the third attempt to get the Marines out who were trapped inside there. And he and another one of my brothers, Alex Nickel, went into this house and ended up taking immediate fire from the upper floors, because one of the little things people don't realize about that battle is in April timeframe of 2004, the battle had been stopped. We were about 8 square miles away when I was still there in that part of the fight from taking down the remainder of the city of Fallujah from the insurgents that had held it. And the U.S. government and the Coalition Provisional Authority, which is the State Department arm there, came in and said, no, hold your positions, dig in. The call to take down the rest of the city is going to come from Washington, D.C. Within the next 2 days. And all of us, to a man, all the young leaders looked at each other like, they ain't here. We need to finish this fight now. And 2 days turned into 5 weeks, turned into just taking pot shots, which turned into us giving all the ground back that we had bled on.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so then they actually gave the land back over in this political nightmare to the guys that we had been fighting, to the insurgents that had been attacking us. And that will certainly make you lose faith to where you want to look at your bosses like, don't ask me for another thing. Well, I mean, just get me my plane ticket, because obviously we don't know what we're doing. But what that turned into was the city of Fallujah became a rally point for Al-Qaeda in Iraq under a leader named Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. What the modern world knows as ISIS started with Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
Wow.
So Fallujah became a rally point. It became a bomb-making factory for vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. It became a training location for foreign fighters coming in to fight Americans and Westerners in general. And we found all the evidence of that after the final takedown. But anyhow, they ended up what I refer to as gunboating out houses, to where they would take a house and they would hammer mouse holes and notch holes and to have fields of fire so that the enemy protecting the house would always be protected. And you could be 2 or 3 rooms in and control every point of access into the house with automatic weapons fire or rockets or grenades. So it was a Marine killing meat grinder of a place 6 months later when we did the takedown. So several of my friends were involved in this battle in the house. Brad, who was the senior enlisted in the company, and Alex Nickel, who was a young Marine from a different company that Brad was in charge of the previous deployment. They both get into the house. They both immediately take fire. And I used to know all the numbers, but Brad ended up getting shot. I want to say 16 or 17 times.
Oh my!
Stitched up his back. Then Alex ended up losing his leg. He got shot in the leg and up the back a few times. They crawled into his little side room to try to get out of the way of the fire, and the insurgents started hucking grenades down to try and finish him off. Brad rolled onto Alex and absorbed something like 12 pieces of shrapnel from the grenade into his body. Still had the wherewithal to where when the insurgents came down to try to finish them off by hand or with small arms, Brad ended up killing those insurgents who were coming down the stairway. And eventually he was rescued. And there's an iconic picture. If you Google Brad Castle, and that's Kasal, you will see the iconic picture of him being carried out of the house with a handgun, cradled in one hand by two of his Marines, Marquez and Schaefer, who were with Kilo Company then. But he lost something like 6 pints of blood on the floor of that house, refused to be evacuated until every other Marine was out of that house.
Oh yeah, I see the pictures. Wow. And he's still alive. I don't see a death date.
Here's the real the beautiful story with Brad Castle. He was a single Marine, loved everything about the Marine Corps, never wanted to leave it. I have 4 leadership stories that I tell in any leadership talk I give about Brad Castle, and none of which are this house story. This is the act of valor. But in the time I knew him before and the time I've known him after are the leadership stories of how awesome this dude is. He got flown out 2 days later. They kept saying, we're going to have to amputate the leg. We're going to have to amputate the leg. And every response he gave every doctor was, if you take that leg, can I stay in the Marine Corps? And they all said, no, that's not how it works. So he says, find a way to fix my leg. So he ended up going into traction, going into physical therapy. And in his book, he actually says the words where he's like, what he did tell some of the doctors, I'm like, you want to see a suicidal head case, make me leave the Marine Corps. So anyhow, he goes to physical therapy. We both got back from overseas tours. He was in a wheelchair, then he was on a cane. And while he was convalescing, we kept in contact, and he had me come do machine gun classes for some of his guys, just as a reward, because they were not infantry Marines, but everybody likes shooting a machine gun because it's fun. But the 2 years after that fight, many of us from those days attended a ceremony where that morning, he had finally ran his 3 miles in under 28 minutes to pass the Marine Corps time limit.
That's crazy.
Was presented the Navy Cross for his actions that day. He was promoted to Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank, and was allowed to re-enlist in the Marine Corps.
Wow, that's amazing.
The only thing is I see a picture of him here in a Washington Capitals jersey, so I have my no, that's freaking hardcore, man.
So that guy just retired 2 years ago.
Wow.
He retired after 33 years of service. The post he retired from was the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force Sergeant Major. So every combat arms Marine, every air winger, and every support Marine on the West Coast was his.
Wow. That's crazy. And so he retired at the highest rank an enlisted person can go without. Enlisted would be not an officer, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Now, I have a question for you, and I hope this question makes sense, but that's pretty amazing. And that's a very high rank. But my understanding in a military setting, he would still salute like the lowest officer. Is that true, or would officers salute him because of his standing?
Nope, absolutely. He would salute a young second lieutenant fresh out of the academy. Now, there are some senior enlisted who get gruff and surly, and I'm not saying that Brad Castle can't be gruff and surly,
sure,
but he is a class act, and he knows that the more respect and the more he builds that young second lieutenant is going to be able to save lives. That's
cool. That's a really cool thing.
There's a whole culture with the military stuff that I've never been able. I haven't wandered into, and I need to. I have military family. My great grandfather was on the USS Intrepid, and my dad did time in the Navy as reservist, but I never. I need to educate myself more on the military world. All right, so I have another tough one for you.
Yeah.
So what's one of the toughest losses that you saw? And you don't have to be like as far as detail of the difficulty of that, but just like what was just kind of a heartbreak. I mean, it sounds like losing ground when you've spilled blood and some of the political stuff that gets in the way. But I just mean like what's been tough or was tough in service or a tough loss that you dealt with.
So I'll give you a couple hard hitters. The first time that one of my students, because in between the invasion of Iraq and so I was part of the invasion. I did 5 deployments in the 8 years that I was on active duty.
Wow.
2 shipboard.
Were you married during that?
No, I was only married during the last one, during the Fallujah fight.
Okay.
But like my second and third deployments, I was on a shipboard deployment from June of 2002 to December 2002, completely checked out of the Marine Corps, getting ready to start spring semester back at Rutgers, back in New Jersey in early 2003. I hung out with a couple friends during Christmas and stayed in California. And then I was going to fly home to make final arrangements, try to find an apartment back in Jersey. And I got home for New Year's. And then that Saturday after New Year's 2003, I got a call from my bosses back in the Marine Corps and said, you've all been stop loss for floating to war. I need you to get back here on Monday morning. And so we were actually we were only ashore less than 30 days before we got sent back, floated over for the Iraq invasion.
Wow.
And then did 6 months there. But the neat part is what people can't see, because my unit was such an anomaly, is normally when guys only do 1 4-year enlistment for infantry, you're going to go to 1 unit and you're probably going to do 2 deployments and then you're going to get out. And that will be your Marine Corps story, just with that 1 unit. Mm-hmm. But for us, and usually everybody rotates in and out of units, the senior enlisted, the junior guys, every 3 to 4 years. So like if you just do 1 enlistment, that's your time, that's what you're going to do. But for my guys, we had just come off of 2 other deployments. So we had already been in our jobs, working with each other, thinking with each other for all that time.
Yeah.
So if you want to go to war with a unit, that's when you go to war. If you get stop lost at the end of your first one, because my battalion of figure 1,200 Marines did not have a single combat loss during the Iraq invasion.
Wow.
We had guys that got wounded. We had guys that got sent home. We got into the thick of a few fights, but we did not suffer a single combat loss because you didn't need to talk. Everybody hit their mark.
Yeah.
It was like you'd been doing the same show for, 20 years. Everybody knows what to do. I say that because the next deployment after that was the Fallujah tour. But if you look back to where all of us came together, our very first deployment, we caught 2 real world operations on that before September 11th even happened.
Wow.
To where we had, for lack of a better term, we had been bitten by the bug of, I love this Marine Corps lifestyle. I love being a seagoing gunfighter. Because while we were out, we were all on Liberty in Darwin, Australia. We'd been training in Darwin, Australia. Then we spent a few days on Liberty there. And right after we left, the East Timor, which was formerly part of Indonesia, had been fighting a civil war between 2 halves of an island. And there were UN peacekeepers there. Well, the UN peacekeepers were being beheaded for bounties.
Oh, wow.
So we get the call of, we're going to go to East Timor as a show of force and hold the door open for some bad operators on our side to go in and handle the warlords that were doing this. So then we go to East Timor and we end up doing some humanitarian missions there, painting schools, getting food to the people, just a few neat things there. Then we left there and then we hit a couple more Liberty ports. But then in October of 2000, as we were about to put in a port in Bahrain for Liberty there, the USS Cole was bombed in Aden, Yemen. So then we all ships in the 5th Fleet area of operations, that's the Middle East, they were all put out to sea so that it wasn't a coordinated attack, wasn't across multiple fronts. And our senior guys told us, it's like, this is where we start just cutting grid squares and we're going to spend 45 days probably not seeing the port. So then a couple hours later, I was sitting in my rack on ship reading. This is on the USS Tarawa. The
had a nice,
1MC,
big, comfy place to sit.
Oh, absolutely. 140 dudes crammed into a 30-foot by 30-foot box. It's awesome.
Triple high. It's so impressive to me whenever I go into a ship and I'm like, triple, sometimes 4 high. I'm like, geez, Louis, you got one guy literally on the ground and somebody like kissing the rafters. It's like, geez, Louis.
We were 4 high. We were 4 high.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. And so about 4 or 5 hours later, the 1MC, which is the ship's loudspeaker, it's like the PA system on ship. Mm-hmm. The whistle comes over, which means the either the commandant of the amphibious ready group or the captain of the ship's going to talk. And every Marine will remember hearing that. He said, ladies and gentlemen, we've been ordered to make full steam to the port of Aden, Yemen to secure the USS Cole and all of her crew. We are in the game. We get to the Cole. If you haven't seen the pictures of that, the Cole, the suicide bombers had detonated a tugboat, which had a shape charge pushed up next to it. They'd already the Cole had already taken on fuel, and it was on its way back out because they were hoping to detonate the fuel stores too. So the tugboat, the local tug that they rented, gets pushed up, next to the ship as they're tugging it back out into the Gulf of Aden because it's the fuel facility was way in the port. And they end up detonating this tugboat, and they nearly sent the ship to the bottom. Like it gutted the inside of the ship.
Pictures
to where
I can't imagine a ship continuing to sail with a picture in the side of it, like I'm looking at right now. That's impressive.
So
is it just a huge hole in it?
Yeah, it's a gigantic hole. Like you're like, how can a ship float if it has a hole like that?
It's tall enough you could drive 2 school buses through that hole. That hole going into the starboard side of the ship, the right side of the ship, ends at the port side passageway. So like it nearly gutted entirely through amidships. And so when I got to it, because we all got word that India Company, which is one of our rifle companies, was going to be the lead, and they were going to need 2 5-man heavy machine gun teams from Weapons Company, which was my company with the heavier guns, to go in and support. And myself and my buddy Wyatt were named as the 2 team leads, and they gave us 4 more machine gunners from the company. We cross-decked over to India Company, and we beat feet onto the coal on ships and helicopters. To where when we got,
this is all in water. This is all on ships and water.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Crossing between 2 different ships, and then flying and floating into the coal, to where when we got there, the power was out and it was sitting at a 15-degree list in the water. So it was sitting like trying to turn it over on its side.
So the coal, is that the name of the ship that's listing? Yeah. Is that what you're referencing?
Correct. The USS Cole was a Navy destroyer that was bombed. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Like this. So it was sitting in a cant, leaning right. But then we flew in and secured it, and then the sailors started poking their heads out because they were waiting for the next attack. And then all of a sudden they're surrounded by 40 Marines, 4 of which are manning heavy machine guns, daring anybody to try it again.
One of them, a giant man. Like, who is this man?
But I get to that story to explain that we were bit by the bug. That was my first time on deployment, and you got to do the job.
Yeah.
The craziest part was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks after we had left Yemen, because we were there for about a month and a half, 2 months while they reset the keel and then tugged it out and floated it on a big floating dry dock back to Virginia. So me and my guys were 6 hours on, 6 hours off, guarding the ship. And we were like 3 or 4 weeks out of Yemen after we left. And I was reading a news article that it was an interview with one of the sailors from the Cole talking about how thankful they were for Marines being there.
That's cool.
Just that we appeared like ghosts in the darkness, and they knew they were going to be safe.
That's cool. I bet that felt good. That was probably exciting.
Yeah, there's nothing like that in the world.
Oh man. So that was the bug. That was the
bug. Yeah. And then I did another shipboard deployment, and then we did the Iraq invasion. I spent a lot of time in Horn of Africa, in Djibouti, training in Djibouti, which is awful. If you ever get the chance to resort there, don't, because it's terrible.
Noted. No Djibouti.
But then after the Iraq invasion, I got back and I wanted to go teach, because I wanted to go teach machine gunnery. I wanted to go down to the division schoolhouse where I had been a student a couple of times, and be a machine gun instructor. So I went down there. But the trouble is, when you teach at the division schoolhouse versus the basic infantry schoolhouse, you're not safe from a deployment if the division needs you. So I got down there. I was the first machine gunner to check in after the invasion. So the rest of the team finally rounded out, and my major from the invasion, who is a good friend of mine now, he's a retired colonel now, he had come down to be the director of the school for his time. So then this is when General Mattis was in charge of 1st Marine Division, And a fellow that worked for him, who's another friend of mine, is named Chuck Colleton. Now, Chuck had about 30 years in the Corps at that time.
Wow.
And he's what's called a gunner, which is a special rank within the Marine Corps that you cross over to be a warrant officer or chief warrant officer at, I think you're eligible like 18 years. Mm-hmm. And then you go up the warrant officer ranks. And then he was the chief infantry weapons and tactics advisor to General Mattis.
Cool.
So he comes down to my major and says, "Hey, I need 5 sergeants to work on a team directly for me going back over to Iraq. I need 5 guys who can think on their feet and all who have prior deployments." So my boss, my friend Steve, Major Van Riper at the time, gives him my name, gives him Jim Gray's name, who's another one of my best friend who did all the deployments with us. And we went back to Iraq for that last gritty tour, with the idea of working for the division gunner and communicating as we adapt to the insurgent tactics. We would meet with the units, dissect the tactics they were using, and radio that back to the schoolhouse on a weekly basis to get them the information on how to adjust, how to train people better. Like, here's the types of bombs we're finding. Here's the tactics that they're using. Living.
Is that because in the position that you're in, you get a little bit more of a vantage point of what's going on? I mean, as in the job that you had and the location that you were and things, did you just have a better view of kind of what was going down?
Yeah, I could digest it. I could look at the battlefield and let you know how bad could be and how good getting a position of advantage could be. I could digest the battlefield. I could see it. I could see all the variables playing out in my head.
So I have a question that's kind of been popping into my mind as you've been talking and kind of throughout is, so what do you do with this after military service? Like, I keep thinking a machine gunner, what does that translate to? And I'm not, we can wait on this question if you sure in the middle of a point, but I don't want to forget it because I think it's an interesting question, which is what do you do with this once you get out? I wonder this a lot with a lot of different military positions. Like, how does that translate for all those that are really giving a big sacrifice to serve for all these years? And then when they leave, what is open, or what options do they have? So at some point, I if you wouldn't mind answering that or kind of talking or alluding to that.
No, and the teaser to that is my current job title is I'm a protective force training manager.
Cool.
As a contractor for the federal government.
That sounds cool.
Yep. There's one job that's better than that. And I'm going to tell you that here very shortly. Okay. But we get to that overseas deployment. I had trained one machine gunner class in between the Iraq invasion and going back for the Fallujah fight. Mm-hmm. And it was 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, which was a sister battalion to my unit that I grew up in. And the hard thing to start was the first time I saw one of my students on the KIA list. And you remember having a hand in making him harder. Yeah. Having a hand in making him be the toughest thing out there.
Sure.
And then he's taken.
Yeah.
Really tough.
And then his own story that his guys recounted to me after we all got back. Aaron Austin was this particular student's name. There's no other way he would have gone. He died taking it to the bad guy. When nobody else could carry on, he made it back to the gun. He ended up losing consciousness behind the gun while engaging the bad guy.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And that was the first one. That was the first of my students that I saw on a KAA list. And then as we moved on from there, several friends, the next of whom died in a military accident. His Humvee fell off a bridge. He ended up drowning with his guys. One of my other students, well, not one of my other students, one of my old guys, Brian Oliveira, who was a forward observer, during my time. He was actually working with the locals after I had left, to where he was just training the local Iraqi National Guardsmen, and they had broken for a soccer game. So they were just kicking a soccer ball around in a parking lot, and a rocket attack came in and took Brian. And then those were dark times, because my old unit, the thing that has made me crazy for years is that was the first deployment that they were on without me in the previous 6 years. So I'm sitting home completely helpless, watching these names roll in, and it was awful.
Is that one of the things that's hardest? Is for servicemen in particular, of that notion of like not being able to do something? Is that one?
Absolutely.
That just really pulls on you with all your training or capabilities or whatever, is when you're stuck in this position? Because you see that kind of metaphor or idea played out in a lot of these military movies, where there's this notion of not being able to, is it just seems really a part that just gets.
Or had you been there, you could have changed fate. Mm-hmm. You could have changed to something.
Yeah.
Because to use a Willow reference, you've lived this life where you're this roguish seagoing gunfighter, very Mad Mardigan, and you're yelling at Eric, "Give me a sword, I'll win this war for you." That's how we live.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a question with that. So on that idea of not being able to help, I know that, like, in your Facebook feed, I've commented a few times and I've seen you. It seems like you've had a lot of brothers that have lost the battle to suicide, or the mental health battle with suicide. What's your short take on what is the demon inside those that really is it just the battle shock or PTSD? Is it what would you say that from where you sit that you think these guys are going through? Is it just the being kind of convicted over the things that have happened overseas that they can't live with, or is it not being there for others and they feel like they should have, or like the better ones didn't come back? Like, what do you think it is that vexes a lot of these guys that tragically end up in suicide?
So there's a couple things going on there, and the long story short for me, and how, because the one that really got me 3 years ago, was a fellow named Billy Shepperson. So Billy was a scout sniper. I deployed with him on 2 different occasions. He is on that Fallujah tour, that 04 trip. He was legendary. Like, the things that he did under fire, the counter sniper operations, the shots that he took amid rockets coming in around him. He was always, just cool as a cucumber, just absolutely, silent as the breeze. He's amazing. He was amazing. And he was also one of the people who, in the group of friends that I run with that unit, that could stay in contact with each other, genuinely looked like we were keeping it together. He was one of the rocks, which I, to some extent, am considered. So that shook me in a scary way, because all of us kind of reaffirmed those lines, and it's like, are we doing the appropriate self-diagnostic here?
Yeah.
So, because all I could take away with Billy's case and with a couple others of my friends, I call it you can't lose it over burning the eggs. You have had to live and operate in a world where, if you weren't damn near perfect, you were wrong and you were going to die. So we pushed ourselves to be that best gunfighter, because that was the version of ourselves that was going to survive and was going to bring everybody home. There's this great Heraclitus quote that I know Goggins has said on multiple occasions, but I was quoting it back when I was teaching, where it was, out of every 100 men, 10 shouldn't even be there. Right. The other 80 are just targets. 9 are the fighters, and we should be thankful to have them before they make the battle. 1 is a warrior, and he will bring the others home.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to us, what I have always added to that is the neat part about my life is, and our lives is, we got to live as the 9 all the time. And when you live as the 9, you never stop trying to be the 1.
Mm.
So you think it's that notion of not being the 1 that just riddles guys that come back, or what?
I think it's the notion of we don't know how to deal with not being good at things that will make us better husbands or fathers.
So
we don't always process that well, or we don't see it.
So the negotiation of like not war life and how do I be successful at this? And it's hard to connect. Right. It's hard to make the marriage work. It's hard to feel like you can be a good dad or whatever. So that adjusting back to a non-warrior is a tough transition, it sounds like.
It's like, how do you learn to be gentle again?
Because you've been like
it's hard.
Beast. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a hard transition also when I think of like clients that I'm working with, have this sense of real danger that's really perceived, right? It's a perceived danger because there's, for most of us, there's not real danger in our immediate surroundings. But I think what you're describing, Bill, is going from an actual real danger to what we have, which is perceived danger, and trying to balance and mitigate that in a way to where you're helping your mind understand that you don't have to be perfect because there's not actual real life and death danger at home. And
right.
And helping your mind understand that perfectionism is not required anymore, because if you make a mistake, that's being human. Where out in the field, making mistake is real danger. And so I think it's kind of that mitigating and helping your mind understand that perfectionism is no longer necessary, nor is it attainable in a setting of like the day-to-day life with family and friends, compared to maybe the life that our servicemen and servicewomen live more on a day-to-day basis when they're out on deployment.
Well, and I also wonder if, I'm sorry, Michael.
Is that kind of part of it, Bill, or are we?
I think I would agree, because I would definitely agree that is spot on to my thinking as far as when I have done that self-diagnostic, because I can look about my own manifestations of PTSD that I've experienced. There are a couple of my friends who can't come to grips with taking another human life, which we had to do, those types of things.
Sure.
But it's more like my manifestations of PTSD are about something going wrong.
Right.
I can tell you, I said that last deployment was the only one that I was married during.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the first time that I ever came home with a honey-do list. Right. So normally when I get back off deployment, I'm getting ready to take 2 weeks off or 3 weeks off. We're going to go down to the beach. We're going to pour a beer. I'm going to burn my death letter. We're going to call it good. We're square.
Yeah, that totally changes things. And I wonder too, if the culture, like one of the things that I've observed, and feel free, Bill, to completely correct me if I'm wrong, but in that environment of survival and finishing the mission and, squeezing out the capability and strength to be your best, to do great things, to defend our country, and all the things that are a part of, I imagine, being a warrior, is the notion of, how to, is the lack of the quality of supportive and emotionally articulate conversation. It seems to me that what these guys need is to be able to dialogue through all of that. And that's not a part of the culture to build up a guy to be, a machine of war.
For sure, not in the moment.
Yeah.
Like not immediately following or even midterm following. It took me and my guys a solid, what are we at now? 17 years to get to the point now where we freely talk because we found how important it is.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that like makes me insane, because I'm like, if they just understood, if they learned how to weave that in, because us guys function compartmentally, like we can do that. So you can come back and debrief and cry or whatever they need to do, and then be able to then turn it back on, especially because that will help process. Those guys won't get stuck there if they allowed them to do that. And I just feel like somebody needs to let me in the military and to talk to them and be like, look, if you want resilient guys, you need to develop some emotional, intelligence.
And I think that's even tenfold for those who have experienced real life or death danger, right? Because your mind has really developed this idea that it is life or death. And so transitioning back into life where it's not life or death, but it's perceived danger, your mind automatically perceives something that goes wrong as life or death still. Right. And so being able to express emotion when it feels still like it's real life or death is not easy, because it's scary for anyone to express emotion. Absolutely. Even more scary if your mind's saying, well, wait, that feeling is life or death. You need to be on guard. You need to fight. You need to fight. Fight or flee. Right. Yeah. And I think that's a transition that really needs a lot of education, probably, because you and I deal with it all the time, John, and we're working with people who some people have experienced real life or death trauma. But for the most part, it's more attachment based traumas that are more perceived or perception.
Well, and all these guys have that, right? Because they're all normal people that grew up in normal families. So you've got that as a backdrop, and then you're throwing them into a situation where it has been actual life or death. Yeah. And there's not this ability to, to kind of articulate and talk through that, so that, because there's no normalization, right? And then it's like, well, you're weak, or, you're some derogatory name that Marines will.
And it's so hard to talk. It's so hard for even me to do that, looking at attachment trauma in my life, let alone thinking of someone who has experienced actual life or death situation, like a real life or death situation, and them trying to transit. I think that would just be even that much harder. It's all hard, but
it's got to be escalated.
Adds a layer.
Well, because the button that gets pushed is the kind of intense emotional reaction that is being experienced on the edge of death.
Yeah.
So it's like, to then talk through that, you've got to be able to develop a window of tolerance for, I'm about to die. Like, oh wait, to be able to be emotionally articulate with my wife, you're telling me that I have to contend with the moment I was on the edge of death, or witness my closest friends
so
die,
crazy,
especially if I made an error or something, like, for crying out loud. But that's literally what we're talking about.
Then we look to Bill, like you're saying, with suicide, and I could see how, I can't even say to completely understand, right? But I could see how that rationale can get to that point where it's like, in my mind, it's life or death. Well, I'm no good. I'm not helping anyone anymore. I'm just hurting everyone. Why even be here? It would be better if I weren't. It would be better for those that I love if I weren't. And I could see that rationale come out, when really what's happening is loneliness and pain and fear and just a desire to connect. I think, I'm assuming a lot here.
Well, you've got these guys that desperately need to connect, but that's, like, in one respect, the most unmacho thing you can do, which is not true. But that's a part of that shame.
And as a sergeant of them, when I tell them to shelve their nonsense and we need to connect, it means, something different coming from me than coming from a voice they don't know, especially in the beginning.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Because that, one of our godsends has been Sergeant Major Ed Sachs and Colonel Willie Buell, who were the two senior people over the unit. Because so my unit in 2004 lost 33 Marines in the city to combat.
Wow.
Then by 2010, so 6 years later, we had lost roughly 10 more to suicide.
Wow.
And in 2010, I remember Ed Sachs getting on the phone with us, getting on the email with everybody he still had emails and phone numbers for, and saying, all right, you knuckleheads, the colonel and I are done with this. We're getting everybody together on Camp Pendleton in November. And if anybody needs help with plane tickets or gas money or whatever, we're going to go get some rooms at the Hilton in Oceanside, and we're going to get everybody together. So we did. And I think the first time it was maybe 300, probably less, maybe like 200 guys. And that was the start of the rumblings of what we now have now, which is an association that was founded around that Fallujah tour, that incorporated the guys from the invasion and the guys from the 2005 deployment, and has fanned out to where now, I don't know how many members we're actually running right now. I'm on the board of officers as the historian for the association.
Cool.
But we've incorporated World War II Marines from our unit, Korean War Marines, as their numbers started to dwindle. They didn't have their big association anymore, so they tucked in as part of ours. We have our Gold Star families that are part of the association. So that that connection for the guys who didn't come home, the guys whose unit brothers were there, and who may feel that sense of loss now that they're reconnecting. You know, my friend Martina, that you'll see on my Facebook feed a lot. She lost, if you look at Martina Berger's story, her husband finally succumbed to cancer. He was a decorated Vietnam Marine. Finally succumbed to cancer due to the effects of Agent Orange in May of 2004. 3-1 deployed in June 2004. Her baby boy, Dale, her only son, was killed in action November 2004.
Wow.
So for Martina to get out of bed come December 2004,
yeah,
she is one of our favorite people on the planet, but she's one of the most vibrant people I've ever met, to where she lives for each of us, for each of the other Marines of the unit. She was our association president when we first got the association together for a couple of years.
Amazing.
Oh yeah. But that reconnection, that 2010 meeting where we all got together, and it was the first time some of my guys had seen me in 6 or 7 years, and I was their sergeant or I was their brother, and they hadn't connected with anybody. My ear was so full of everybody else's stories and the crazy things and feelings and thoughts and everything that people had gone through, because they weren't willing to talk to anybody else. And there were several of me's, for lack of a better term, in the sergeants that were there. To where, I mean, it was an emotional overload, but it finally got people talking. And that first one in 2010 is when we started to realize we need this, and we need this as often as we can do it. And we need it in small doses and large doses. Every 2 years now, we have a big reunion. We just had our last one, or our most recent one. And I have no doubt in my heart that association is saving lives through what we do.
That's awesome. What is the association called?
It's 3rd Battalion 1st Marines Association.
That's cool. 3rd Battalion 1st Marine. Man, that is really cool. It is, like you said, it was emotional overload. It is. It is tiring dealing with emotions. It can really, really drain you, but it's so important to get them out, because that's where the healing begins.
So this transitions nicely, this topic, though it's a tough one, transitions nicely into the show that we've got on the docket to talk, which is the Never-Ending Story. And the idea of the tragedy that's a part of suicide, or that's communicated incredibly well in the show, is the nothing. And, what kind of takes away or overwhelms or swallows up everything and seems like we can't ever recover from. So what is it about this movie, Bill, that made you want to talk about it? What is it that you really connect with, or what did you identify as a kid, or I don't know if you watched it a lot since then, but what about this movie was it that you wanted to talk about?
So there's a couple things. Me as a kid, I was a very big kid. I was always a big kid, but I was always very shy. I was always very concerned about wanting others to like me. I I was a freak of nature. I walk into kindergarten the first day of school and I'm looking the teacher in the eye. So I'm this big giant thing.
It's like the 12-year-old class is down the hall.
Right. Which leads to he doesn't really want to be in class because he doesn't really feel like anybody understands him. So he doesn't really do that good in class, doesn't apply himself. He'd rather be doodling off in the corner or reading a book. No, it's just the idea of the kid that didn't really fit in.
Okay. Yeah, you identify with the main character is what you're describing.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That I would rather be off doodling in a corner, not doing my work. There were times, other than buying kids ice cream, there were times where I would give my work away, and my work was always pretty good, my schoolwork, because, I would get roped into that I'll be your best friend thing, and I didn't have a best friend. Mm-hmm. I had my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that notion, so you identified with Sebastian and this idea of kind of being isolated, kind of down, feeling out of sorts.
Right. But I always wanted an adventure, even though I was scared of my own shadow at that age. I wanted an adventure. I wanted an epic love story. I wanted all these different things that who I was didn't really speak to what I really wanted and what I yearned for. The earliest memories of this story or Willow or Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, the first movie I ever saw in the theaters, wanting to be that, but not having any of the gumption to be the hero character because I was this pudgy kid who was scared of his own shadow.
All right, so I have to bring this up right off at the beginning, okay?
Yeah.
Though it's the end.
Yeah.
I didn't realize, I remember the whole, say my name. And I was watching, I was like, oh, what is the name he says? I couldn't remember. And then he says it and I'm like, wait, what? I had to turn the subtitles on to catch what name he was screaming into the wind. And then so it's wait, Moonchild? Wait, what?
Moonchild.
Why?
Yeah.
Why is he naming I was expecting his mom's name, something
like
that.
That's what everybody was waiting on. Yeah.
I was like, Moonchild. I just felt like this curveball of what's the message in that naming Moonchild. It was I had to say it kind of threw me for a loop this time around because I didn't remember that. But and also so what do you guys think of the significance of Sebastian calling out the princess's name and saving the world? I don't know what the name of the world is.
Fantasia,
that's right, thanks. Fantasia. What do you think the significance of that is? What does that mean to you guys, this notion of? For
me, you're making it real. Okay. Because it is a thought, it's an idea, it's a concept in the world, you're making it real. Mm-hmm. You're giving it substance. You're fashioning an idea out of nothing. Because you remember right after that is when they have the scene with the grain of sand. And that's all it takes. Is one grain of sand, I can remake the whole world, this whole world of imagination.
Right. Which seemed significant and important for this character, right? Because, he'd been thrust into kind of the sobering reality of the world and the loss of mom, and his dad's trying to kind of buck up and put your feet on the ground. And he's, he doesn't want to be in this world because it's a world of sadness, right? It's a world that's dark and nothing, right? That's really how the story comes in. So that's cool. Mike, what were your thoughts? Did you have other thoughts about the significance of the name being spoken?
I don't know if I thought a lot about that part so much. There's just so much in this movie, and I think I made the comment to the two of you I can't remember earlier. I made the comment, man, I haven't watched this in so long, and now I'm wondering why I haven't, because it's really an interesting, good movie.
It is.
And I watched it all the time as a kid, and I always thought as I got older, man, why did I watch that movie so much? I would watch it all the time as a kid, and then I watched it again, and I'm like, whoa. It's really good. There's a lot.
I mean, they beat you over the head with the obviousness of it, but it's so rich in so many important things.
I agree with what Bill said. That makes sense to me. I didn't really think a lot about that, but I just want to talk about one part real quick.
Sure.
So in our field, we have different models of therapy. And one particular model kind of jumped out to me as I watched this movie. And that's a model called ACT, or acceptance commitment therapy. And the idea with the ACT model is that you have pain, you have emotions, you have feelings. And the idea is not necessarily to just get rid of these emotions, but to learn how to progress forward towards the things that you desire to move towards in life, while still having these emotions and not having them block you or hook you and pull you away from the direction you want to be going. And I feel like Atreyu is such an amazing example of incorporating ACT in his life. Like, no matter what befalls him, he continually has this ability he has to be feeling pain, and you can see it sometimes. You can see this pain, but he continues to move towards the things that he values in life despite the pain. And I think how often in life we experience pain and we do what the horse does in the swamp. We get hooked by it and we sink quick, right?
Well, this is one of the things that's so powerful about this movie too, that I think people don't realize in storytelling that's so significant. Like, that wrecked me as a kid. And even watching it this last time,
my girls cried.
Yep. Dies. It's like it does, but it's so real, right? Like, stories don't do that. They won't, they won't eliminate an important character. It's like, oh, the audience can't take it, but it's so significant that loss happens in this, in the swamp of sorrows, and it's so, I was devastated by that loss, and it was so meaningful to embrace that is life. I mean, life in the journey, in the quest, you can get stuck in the swamp. And I love the idea of the mud and the heaviness and getting stuck and wanting to pull something.
Oh yeah, that was great.
And what does Atreyu say to the horse? Like, at one point he looks back and he's like, oh, it's just difficult or something. Like, he's looking at all these different ways to help kind of diffuse the pain of the horse. The horse can continue forward, and the horse can't get out of it, which happens to us sometimes, right? We just can't. But
he's pleading and pulling, and then that scene where it's just the horse is just gone and he's just sitting there. It's just so devastating.
And then what does he do? He moves forward despite that immense pain. He's able to, right? And that's where I see the ACT just come out with Atreyu, is he's able to have the emotion. He doesn't have to necessarily get rid of it. He's able to have it, but still move forward. And I think what a powerful message for us in life to know, hey, we deal with hard things, but there is a path forward. It may not be comfortable and it may not be easy. His path through the swamp was not easy. This is just a young kid.
And then he's getting sneezed on by this freaking gigantic tortoise. Like, shot continuously.
Yeah, that was pretty fast. Yeah.
I will say with Atreyu in the beginning, from the very beginning, when he's first called to the Ivory Tower, the aloofness of when they're laughing at him and they say, not Atreyu the boy, Atreyu the man. Or Atreyu the warrior, and he says, I'm the only Atreyu of the plains people. Yeah, but if you don't need me, I'll go back to hunting the purple buffalo.
He's out, dude. I'm just go do
whatever, dude.
You guys called me. You want me or not?
But yeah, back to the swamps of sadness and Morla. That is probably my most hated character in that movie. Is just the constant. Not that it matters.
Yeah.
I hate that. Yeah. Like, I have a visceral reaction to hearing someone like that. So that in that symbol.
I loved the tortoise. The tortoise seemed just so majestic, and it's true. He's so whiny in his voice, and he's so flagrantly like, I don't even care, and like, it's, but nothing's coming. Don't you? And he's like, whatever. He's like leaving. Like, I loved all of that. It was just so like, it's
the
true,
tortoise.
it's abhorrent.
the tortoise for me represents our mind and how our mind will speak to us. And the kind of, if we go back to, I keep going back to ACT, I'm sorry, but if we go back to this ACT model, the idea is that our mind is constantly kind of grabbing onto things and trying to pull us away from what we really value in life and what we want to move towards. And that's what the turtle, what was his name, Bill? I think you just mentioned the turtle's name.
Morla.
Oh, maybe it's a girl then.
Morla.
It's a female turtle. I keep saying.
It might be a dude. I don't remember.
But that's what the turtle represents.
It's an ancient one.
Is like my mind, right? Pulling me away from really hooking me and pulling me away from what I desire in life. And that's what it was trying to do.
And though it's abhorrent, Bill, and it plays on that dismissal, that depression. The thing that's so interesting, though, is that the ancient one had the knowledge, right? So it's almost like to get the information you need to move forward, you have to kind of go through this swamp of sorrows and confront this ancient, dark, depressed voice. But there is wisdom.
Well, that's where resilience is built, right? Resilience is built upon the experience of knowing I can do hard things and I can make it through. And I think that's kind of that, right? That's his, the idea of someone or our minds try to pull us astray constantly. But if we push through, we don't rob ourselves of the knowledge and the experience, the reward afterwards of saying, hey, that was hard, but I did it. I can do hard things.
Right. And that's where the knowledge comes from, right? It comes from going and confronting that place. And it gives you what you need, because it's like, if you can carry on through that, if you can make it through the swamp of sorrows, what can't you can do? Because, it's interesting though. It's also interesting though, too, that Atreyu, ends up completely overwhelmed, and he's saved, right? He's saved by the luck dragon from that. I mean, he's picked up
by one of the best characters ever.
Yeah, of course. Come on. The animatronic dog, which my daughter was watching it with me, and she was horrified. She's like, what is that thing? I'm like, Falcor, man. Like, Falcor's the best. I'm like, Falcor was like my most favorite, fanciful creature growing up. And she's like, kind of like, well, the graphics aren't real good. I'm like, it's a freaking puppet.
I still love puppetry. For me, I would take puppetry, this side note real quick. I'm sorry. And Bill, I'm probably monopolizing. You probably have things you want to say, but but for me, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie with the costumes, the Muppetry. I think Jim Henson was involved in that a little bit.
What's the rat's name?
Corey Feldman.
I love those way more than I even love any of the animatronic, or any of the CG, the computer graphic.
Right. There's something about a puppet realness. Yeah, it is kind of hokey in some sense. What's the rat's name? What's their teacher's name? Splinter. Oh,
Splinter.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Confused.
We can go back to the movie.
No, you're exactly right.
I just get excited. This movie has so much in it. My mind is just shooting all over.
Yeah. To that end, the Muppets are a mainstay in this house.
Yes, Muppets are awesome.
I'm also a Muppet lover as well. All right, there's so many places I want to jump to, but Bill, what else, Bill, did you love about this, or that is a point or something that really is big for you?
No, and to Michael's, just kind of following on Michael's thought, Atreyu, you all have talked with other folks about the hero with 1,000 faces and the Joseph Campbell hero's journey, the arc of it all.
Yeah,
Atreyu is awesome, and it's like just that last. It's weird watching this now, having combat experience and having lived through my time in the Marine Corps and been raising gunfighters in my professional life for the 15 years I've been out, to where there is still that aloofness in the beginning of, I'll just go back to hunting the purple buffalo, get over yourself, all the way through in the catacombs, in the ruins, when he finally kills the Gamorreek. And he says, he's like, if we must die, I'm going to die fighting. Come for me, Gamorreek. I am Atreyu.
Yeah, what is it's? Yeah, he's like, because the wolf does the wolf not realize it's him or something? There's this kind of unknowingness, and he's like, it's me. He's like, come get it, man. That's so it's you know, but it's interesting to me though too, because one of the things that I really identified with this movie, and I think was one of the things that I loved about it, was, and I get now watching it now, that Atreyu was a piece of the boy of Sebastian, right? But I loved the whole scene as much this time as I did when I was a kid, where he's like, wait, they need me? Like, that's impossible. I'm just a kid reading this book, and they're like, wait, like, I love that whole outtext. She's like, well, he's reading right now, but he doesn't even know. And it's just like, I love this whole I love the whole notion that the fantasy comes into the reality. And I love that the discovery of like, oh, it's me. I'm the one that can be the hero, or I'm needed to be the hero by making this real. Just,
you're breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah.
Just, it struck me so powerfully as a kid of like, I'm just this nerdy kid that's getting thrown in trash cans. It's totally the redhead experience when I was skinny and scrawny and, you know, fourth grade or whatever it was when I was getting beat up on. And so I totally identified with that, and identified with that, just that realization of that empowerment. And this movie was empowering to me, I think, because I had a learning disability that was really debilitating in my early years, particularly. And it really, this movie pushed me to read. And I still wasn't a great reader, but it still pushed me to read and discover books. Like I love the old guy in the bookstore, you know, and he's like,
Mr. Coriander.
Yeah, he's like, you don't want this. This isn't a book, you know, for kids. And just the like the weight of it, and the snake, you know, charm on the cover, and then like him sneaking off into his like private, like, you know, clubhouse in the school, like everything about
and he sneaks off, but he is so non-gangster that he leaves a note saying, I'll bring your book back.
Right. Oh yeah. He steals his book. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But just that whole thing, like I love that whole thing of like this like safe place, like getting away to kind of engage this journey, and that there's this sage kind of, because I always loved the notion of a mentor. And so, you know, there's a lot of different mentors in this movie. And just that old man, like, you know, opening this space, because this kid does need fantasy. And what's so cool about it is that it's the fantasy and him, you know, processing through the fantasy that really allows him to ground himself and to move past the nothing, right? Like if he didn't have these stories, he wouldn't have been able to move past the nothing. And that's just so profound.
Absolutely. And how to build on your point, having those mentors, having faith in yourself, finding that way. You know, I said earlier on, I tell the scouts in the scout troop that my sons and now my younger daughter's a part of, that I've been on this adventure since I was 8 years old, because that little kid who was scared of his own shadow, who didn't have faith in himself for anything and needed to borrow other people's courage. And then it wasn't until the man he loved most lost faith in him that he goes on this amazing journey for me out in the Marine Corps. And there was a moment about my last thing that I did in the Marine Corps was I was chief machine gun instructor of 1st Marine Division. So that means all of the machine gunners for all of the West Coast infantry battalions rotated through me through a schoolhouse and my team of instructors who were all multi-tour combat vets. And we would prep them. We would start their preparations for training and start them on that road to combat ready. And Friday afternoons were always my time with the students, where we would talk about leadership. We would talk about machine gunners of old. I would have interviews. I would have guests come in and just talk to them about what being a gunfighter has meant to them throughout their whole lives. And there was a moment, probably about 4 months before I left that post, or 3 months before, because I had already moved Renee out to Vegas. She was pregnant with our oldest boy. And I was living in the barracks, and I was just walking down between the rows of the barracks. The barracks were just open squad bays where my students lived. And I hear my students talking in the dark, and I hear, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, my students having conversations with their junior guys. And they were casting my name in amongst these other legends. about who they want it to be. And that's a heavy weight. Like that is, but it's awesome. Like I am not built to be able to shy away from it. But it's like, I can never allow that person to lose that kind of faith. And I have to live up to that every day.
That's cool. Yeah, that's definitely meaningful and purposeful for sure. One of the that's a fantastic point, man. I'm so glad to connect with that and share that. Okay, there's another thing we have to talk about with these shows, and it's the gates, right? So he's saved by Falkor, and I love the couple. You know, the
gnomes at the Southern Oracle.
Yeah, the doc and the scientist guy. I love their banter. He's like, "Shut up, you lame shit." She's all like dismissing him, and I love how she says, "It has to hurt to heal," or "It has to hurt to heal." I love
that was great
phrase. And the thing too that I discovered, which I didn't go check out, I think she's the voice of the bad witch in The Sword of the Stones, which I need.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Madam Mim.
Madam Mim. I think it's the same actress, which is no surprise that it also I would have loved, because Sword in the Stones is probably one of the most favorite childhood movies.
Well, and that couple reminds me a lot of the couple in Princess Bride.
Yeah, absolutely.
Miracle Max.
Yeah.
Or not Bill Murray, Billy Crystal.
Yeah.
All right. So the Sphinx and the three kind of contentions, right? I love this.
Right.
But all right, one of the things, I don't know how appropriate this is, but one of the things that I was always kind of like mesmerized by were the giant boobs of the Sphinx.
Absolutely. Yeah. All of us who are this age were
looking up at just gigantic huge boobs.
I thought that the other night when I was watching it, I was like, dang, I don't remember that there was this is like a PG movie.
I totally remember the huge boobs. I absolutely 100%.
I did not remember that.
So I'm not sure what conquering your fears below huge boobs is supposed to mean.
It can't hurt.
Distraction. It's a distraction.
Or I don't know. There's
it makes it that much harder.
I don't know. There's notion.
No pun intended. Sorry. Inappropriate.
The divine feminine over you, or if that's the message or the portal of mothers to kind of teach you these things, but the idea that he has to first kind of contend with and be worthy. The second one was facing your true self.
I really liked the second one, and I just thought, man, I really had a lot of thoughts about this, and I thought our true self, and it was kind of like pointed out to him that, hey, this is going to be so hard. And kind of the thought kept coming to me that really our true self is not our true self. It's what we think we are, right? It's what we fear that we are, but our true self is grand. It's great.
Yeah, it should ennoble us, right? So it's the shame, right? It's contending with the shadow of yourself.
Yeah, it's this fear of what we think we are, not what we actually are. And I thought of this quote. It's a quote that I don't remember who. It's a lady gives the quote. And I kind of thought of this quote. I don't know if it really pertains to this part, but it's the deepest fear quote. Do you remember that? Or I'll read it. It's, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. And it kind of goes on to build you up. But it's this idea, right, that our deepest fear is what we think our true self is, not what our true self actually is. And coming to terms with that is scary, right? Because we have this fear of, what if I'm not that thing? What if I'm not grand? What if I'm not great?
Well, and a part of that could be contending with trauma, contending with failure. and thinking that defines us, right? And seeing that as our true self, these mistakes that we've made, or these, unsurmountable weaknesses that we feel like we have, and not wanting to admit that that's what it is, or that's us, right? Because there is a certain amount of contending and acceptance, if you want to go back to ACT, with, our limitations or our fears. But yeah, I like that. I love that spin on it, Michael, that really connecting with the true power within, because we have the power within to transcend these perceived or real traumas or shames, right? And I think that's all a part of the contending experience.
Well, and I love like I think for us, seeing our true self is like really seeing our true self. It's not, the scary part is seeing the lie and believing that's true.
Yes.
But seeing beyond that is where the growth comes. But I think it's funny because we phrase it in a way of, we don't want to see our true selves because we think our true selves are nasty, right? Failure. Or bad. Yeah. And so I have a lot of thoughts. It really, I just, there's so many parts of this movie and I'm like, whoa, I don't know if they meant this when they were doing this movie, but it's got a lot.
There's so many things. Well, and I love that then the knowledge comes from. We skipped to the second one real quick, but what do you think about the notion of being worthy? And I thought it was interesting that he got through the laser beam shooting eyes worthy gate with his speed.
Yeah.
I'm like, what does that strike you as? Because that's not what I think of when you think of worthy. Is this notion of being, is it that he outsmarted it, and that was this notion of worthiness? Because that seems like
so to that, like,
go ahead, Bill.
Where I end up going is it's knowing when to run.
Yeah. So he had confidence in himself in that moment to take the step, which was the right step, which then made him worthy of the cause because he had that confidence. That was kind of my take. Is that, what do you think, Bill?
Yeah, no, that was where my head went. It's like in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, you have to choose wisely, right? So you could have all the armor in the world, doesn't matter. If you don't know when to run, if you just try to blaze through it from start to finish, well, the Sphinx is going to get a lead on you and you're going to get hit. But if you have faith in yourself of when to run, when to make that choice, when to go left instead of going right, you move when that thought strikes you.
And that notion of capability is what makes you worthy of the challenge.
Well, and my thought is we're all worthy. It's just, are we in tune with what is the right thing to do? Do we have what was the phrase you just used, Bill? The self-confidence or the ability to recognize within ourselves when we should make that step or make that choice. And that was kind of my thought is,
right.
I think we're all worthy. We're all able. It's just not all of us are at a point in our life, where we have that confidence to move forward.
And it's interesting too, right? Because I'm sorry, Bill.
No, I was going to say, and to that end too, if you flip that on its head as well, and say, I'm not going to just let this happen to me. I'm going to make a choice.
Yeah.
Because you could try to think, well, I should just walk through and see if I'm the person that's allowed to just walk through. And at that moment, it's like, no, this is where I have to leap.
Yep.
Well, and I love the comparison or the juxtaposition of somebody that's armored up, right? That's trying to put on all these things that says I'm worthy, that says I'm strong, and you've got Atreyu like who's in a loincloth almost, and it's just this kid who's stripped down and just looking and contemplating, right? Just that comparison of what is needed to get through that gate, that intuition, that courage, that confidence.
Well,
and it seems really significant.
For me also, Atreyu knew what was going to happen. He had seen it, and he still makes the choice because he knows that, that's kind of his character, right? That's what needs to happen. Someone has to do it. So I might as well do it, even if it does cost me my life. And I think that kind of goes along with, he gets to the point of the gates after he's had all these struggles. And so I think part of what helps him or enables him,
which I love that that's ongoing, right? And I love the metaphor of gates and the fact that he had to get the knowledge to get to the gates and then still face the gates and still gets the knowledge from the gates, right? Because the third sense is the one that's like, well, you've got to go to the princess. And I think they actually disclose, right, that you've got to say the name, right? Don't they say that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I love the notion that it's that process that then gets you to still even kind of the doorstep of the answer, right?
Well, and I think
really,
and I think what enables him to be able to get through that gate is that he has built, like he's gained resilience. He's understood that he can do hard things. And so when it gets to that point where he knows the risk, he's seen it just happen seconds before, he makes the decision at the right time as to when to run, because I think he's built up that resilience and he knows I can do hard things. And that gives him the confidence to make the decision. And then, like you said, John, that builds on even further as we go further into the game.
Well, and he's got these, kooky people in the background cheering him on. He's got the Bluff Dragon.
Everybody needs kooky people cheering him on.
Right, absolutely. You need those crazy characters like giving some information and all that kind of in the background as ancillary supports. And I love that this is all happening while he's being chased by the nothing and the Gomorak, right? Like it's so interesting. Like in the middle of all this is just such intense chaos. Like, how do you overcome the freaking nothing? Like that's not even a thing. And then he doesn't even know he's got this just insanely ferocious wolf, which as a kid terrified me. I think I had nightmares. If I remember back, I think I had nightmares about the Gomorak, like this notion of this bloodthirsty thing that's snarling in the darkness. Well, and it's so powerful. I watched too.
The Gomorak in the ruins with the green eyes glowing. I watched through fingers the first time. Like the first one or two times I was like, oh my goodness.
It is scary.
It's so terrifying because the nothing is chewing up everything. He's seeing these pictures that it's really this interesting moment where he's like seeing his journey. And then it's in the darkness and it's just skulking in the darkness and snarling and there's just the glowing eyes and the fangs. It's so terrifying.
And the amazing thing to me is, we talk about how crazy that is, right? All these things going on. But we've all had those times in our life, and all like the member or the clients that we work with, and those your brothers that you work with, Bill, they've all had these moments in their life. They have them in the past. We have them in the future. Like we go through these moments where it is really hard. We have the nothing coming down on us. We have the wolf, scary creature guy coming at us at the same time. We're trying to move through life. We're trying to hang on. And we think about, man, this movie's so crazy, but it really is life. And it's something that we all deal with.
As each new challenge comes, how many times now at 42, I can look back and it was hard to look back for a long time.
Yeah.
But say, look at what I've done. Yeah. Any new challenge at work, any new challenge in the corporate world professionally, any family struggle that we've had to go through. And it's, I can tie it back to stepping into the unknown loses its fear at some point. Because I can tie back my memory of shaking hands with my best friend and giving him a hug before we got into our armored vehicles to cross for the invasion and hugging my best friend Andy and saying, I'll see you on the other side, brother. And not having any notion of the gravity of what was about to happen. Because at that time, Hussein was going to throw chemical weapons at us, and there were minefields, and there were burning trenches, and rockets and everything else. To where now it's, I get into a professional debate with someone in the stuff that I do today, and they don't want to challenge me a lot anymore because it ends up being high noon, and they know with how I am. Like, you see the notion of I live my life swords out. It's when I say things in a corporate boardroom about because I want to do something for the guys and they want to do something to save profits. And I'm like, okay, you pick a hill you want to die on. And I say that out loud and they're like, Bill, stop talking like that. I'm like, okay. this is my programming.
Well, I think an interesting thing is that you mentioned, you have these experiences and it prepares you, right? You're better equipped to handle experiences moving forward, but they're still hard, right?
Absolutely.
They're still hard, but I think the idea here is that over time and throughout our life, they become easier and more manageable, but they're still hard. And I think that's one thing we think sometimes is, well, shouldn't it just get easier? Shouldn't it just be easy to do? And I don't think that's how life works. I think there's always hard things that are going to come up.
Always another more hard thing.
But we become more equipped to handle them. And I think they do become easier, maybe just not easy.
I don't know. I don't know if I agree they become easier. I wonder if we just, like you're making the point, that we just become more competent,
exactly,
and confident.
Yeah.
And I think with that confidence, which I think full circle brings us back to Sebastian saying the name, I think it's the fact that the way through life's most difficult journey is to speak forth the answer, right? Yeah. And when we speak forth the answer, we create a vision of a thing that we have to accomplish or do, and we need the luck dragons, we need the support system behind us, and grace, and I think that magic, if you want to, I don't know, be metaphorical about it, it kind of comes into play. But I think the answer or the success can't happen until you speak it forth, right? And so I think that notion of saying it and being this like helpless little kid, stuck in some attic during a storm, and being like, wait, it's me, like I'm the one people are counting on in this situation, and like how is that me? Like I'm just this pathetic little.
You have learned to frame the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And then you speak forth, like, and it can be whatever you think it can be.
Well, I think for me, the speaking it forth is in some way, I, in that moment, am seeing myself as I truly am and not what I fear that I am. And maybe I don't completely see that, but I'm starting to, or at least in some way, seeing myself. And that's that confidence and that ability that comes forth.
Daring to.
Daring. Yeah. Right? Good word.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like just, going for it. Right. Because when you're going to face the dragons of your life, are you going to lay in the gutter and get eaten alive? Or are you going to dare, like a Goliath to face off against the Goliath? Yeah. What other great story, even if you face off against the dragon or your Davids of your life, the Goliaths of your life, and you get destroyed, you're still honored, because it's like, well, dude stood up and went for it. You know what I mean? Like, because what else can you do as a human? Like, what else do we do in the face of a terrible monster or a Gomorak or a nothing? You have to get up and courageously try, and that's where.
And continuing to broaden that bandwidth, continuing to broaden that bandwidth of where you strengthen your resolve. One of the examples I can use in my personal life here with family is, my three youngest were all diagnosed early with autism spectrum disorder. Wow. And so we had about 5 or 6 years of constant in-home intervention, ABA therapy. Mm-hmm. And we trained young therapists. We had this fantastic caseworker who has her own company now out here in Vegas. Casey Hayden's amazing. She's an amazing person. But she guided us down this road to how to conduct ABA. So like we retooled the entire front of the house to like ABA Central. Like there are so many learning games and there are so many tools. And it was just, the kids would do 6 hours a day in school, in elementary school. Mm-hmm. And then between the three of them, they had 70 hours of in-home therapy because all three had very different deficits. So it was all different programs that were running constantly. So as far as retooling how to learn, it was amazing. Yeah. But facing the unexpected monster that came up, the state at one point changed its programs, which was fully within its bounds to do, but we were going to lose our whole team that we had spent years building, that my wife and Casey had spent 3 years building, to where it was going to be just turning off cold. And we were very worried for my younger daughter, who we were afraid was going to regress because she had the longest road to travel in her. Now, all are indistinguishable from typically developing peers. All are gifted and talented now. As far as the accolades they're doing awesome in different things. But that day when the state did that, and the state changed the programs to where we were going to lose our whole team, and my wife, who doesn't know what to do, who is my rock, who always knows what to do, she's the smart one, right? Between the two of us. So she's crying in my arms, and she doesn't do that. Because we were going to lose the program, we were going to lose the work that we'd done, and that my bandwidth went greater then, because now I had my cause. And now I'm going to go write to every senator and every state official on down, and every one of them by the end of this is going to know who I am. And I'm going to go down to the Grant Sawyer building, the state office building here, and we're going to talk in public forums, and you're going to know who I am. And in the end, they ended up repealing the canceling, and they had the whole program and everything like that, because there were a lot of other parents like me. But that was the battle.
Yeah.
And that was an unexpected battle.
Well, great. Any other lingering thoughts? I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, I got a lot more points, but
I just
ones that need to be made.
I enjoyed it. It was great.
Yeah, I love this.
I could give you the little bit of the last 15 years, just so you can see what a machine gunner does afterward.
Yeah, give us the short on what you're doing now, and I feel like we got some insights.
So
yeah, give us the short on what you're doing.
I had a friend who was a student in 2005. He called me in 2006 when I was in my second year of teaching in the Marine Corps, and he said, "Hey, can you send me your course publication, because I really like the way you put it together?" And I said, "What do you need this for? You retired." And he's like, "Well, I'm working as a security lieutenant outside of Vegas at the Nevada test site." And I didn't know what a Nevada test site was. So I was like, "What's that?" And he's like, "Well,
Nevada, I hear."
Right. So Department of Energy has what's called a contractor protective force guarding its sites. We are one of the 4 what's called NNSA sites, or National Nuclear Security Administration sites. Anyhow, long story short, I got pulled into that. I went to the security academy there, became a protective force lieutenant. So I was still in uniform, still shooting. They qualified me as a firearms instructor and all that. But the hours and the management were things that I didn't like. So I went back in, went to college and finished a master's degree in education. So I went back, finished my master's in education so I could have the paper to substantiate a 40-hour week job versus an 80-hour week job, so I could watch my kids grow up.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's for them.
Yeah, crossed over to emergency management for the site, because the site is a little bit bigger than the state of Rhode Island. It's a massive, massive jurisdiction. Yeah. And they have all these different weird things going on out there to where they need an emergency management apparatus to write the emergency plans and liaison.
All that stuff off the air.
Right. But so I spent 9 years on the emergency management side of things, training with the site responders, training with local and federal law enforcement, training with SWAT teams in town, training for active shooters in Vegas, in high schools and hospitals and malls out here. And I was teaching gunfighters. I was doing that the whole time I was gone. My last 3 years, I ran that department that I had joined. So I was the emergency manager for the site. And then when a new security contractor put in for that security protective force contract that I had originally been on, they asked me, "Can we write you into the contract? And if we win it, will you come run our training academy?" So I've been doing that for the past 3.5 years, and I can do that forever. If they'll have me.
Awesome.
No, that's cool, man. That sounds like a legitly fun, enjoyable, cool job, man.
That's awesome.
It's amazing. So that's what a machine gunner does when he gets out.
There is a path. There is a path.
The soft squash, awesome mentor ones.
Thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciate it. This was a fun conversation. It was a great movie to pick. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And thanks for sharing. I feel like we barely cracked into just the wealth of stories and experiences.
Oh, I bet there's much more.
Yeah, we'll have to maybe. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening. Thanks, Bill, for being with us. And we hope you guys have enjoyed this. Like, share, comment, ask Bill some questions, and thanks so much for being with us. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks all.